Jean wiped the sweat from his forehead, leaving a dark streak of grime on his skin. The afternoon sun on New Segye was weak and pale, but the work of clearing the eastern irrigation line was hard. He looked out over the fields of blue-tinged grain, stretching to the low hills. It was quiet, peaceful, and to most boring. To Jean it was home, and he liked its simple rhythm. His tool scanner beeped, a low battery warning. He sighed. The nearest recharge station was a 30-minute walk north, near the old relay outpost. No one went there anymore. The colony's official defense grid had been offline for years, a fact everyone knew but tried not to think about too much. As he trudged up the worn path, Jean saw a flicker of light from the outpost's main dish. That was odd. The structure was a decaying relic, its metal shell spotted with rust. The main power line to it had been cut 2 harvests ago to redirect energy to the greenhouses. He approached quietly, his curiosity turning to suspicion. The side access hatch, usually sealed with a rusted lock, was open. From inside, he heard the familiar hum of an active plasma torch and a low, steady voice muttering to itself. Jean peeked in. Under the massive, dormant sensor array, crouched in a nest of rerouted cables and open panels, was Tay. The old man's hands, scarred and sure, were splicing a fresh conduit into the main console. The console, which should have been dark, glowed with soft, active readouts. Tay, what are you doing? Jean asked, stepping inside. Tay didn't jump. He finished his weld with a precise spark before turning his head. His face was lined, his eyes the color of old steel. Fixing a leak, he said, his voice a dry rasp. In a comms array? Jean moved closer, looking at the screens. The glyphs scrolling were not colony standard. They were dense, military-grade Earth script. This isn't a leak. This is a full reboot. We were told this system was dead. Mayor Myrie said the parts were impossible to get. At the mention of Myrie's name, Tay's jaw tightened. He stood up, wiping his hands on his worn pants. Some systems are meant to look dead. Keeps the flies from buzzing. What flies? Jean gestured to the peaceful landscape outside the hatch. We're a grain colony. The only things that buzz here are the native pollen bugs. Tay looked at Jean for a long moment, as if deciding something. He then pointed a thick finger at a secondary screen. It showed a schematic of the star system. A small, blinking icon was positioned near the gaseous blue swirl of the Helix Nebula, just 3 light hours away. It was labeled with a simple, cryptic code, MDS. That's a deep space monitor frequency, Jean said, his engineering training kicking in. But it's receiving, not sending. It's listening to the nebula? That's just dust and gas. It's listening, Tay confirmed, his tone final. He powered down the torch. The sudden quiet was heavy. Your sister is a good leader. She works with what she can see. But space is big and quiet. A man learns to listen to the quiet. Before Jean could ask more, the overhead speaker crackled to life, the colony's main channel. Myrie's voice came through, calm but strained. All senior staff and sector managers, please report to the administration dome.
Urgent.
A diplomatic vessel has entered our approach lane. Tay's eyes closed briefly. When they opened, all the weary sadness Jean had ever seen in the old veteran was gone, replaced by a cold, flat focus. He began securing his tools with swift, practiced movements. Who is it? Jean asked, a knot forming in his stomach. Not friends, Tay said, handing Jean a heavy toolkit. Help me close this up. And remember, boy, this never happened. A man who talks about his secrets doesn't have them for long. They sealed the hatch. As they walked back toward the colony center, Jean saw it. A sleek, angular ship descending through the atmosphere. It was gunmetal gray, marked with sharp, aggressive sigils unlike the soft curves of the Galactic Concord vessels that visited once a year. It didn't look like it carried diplomats. It looked like it carried orders. The community square was filling with nervous colonists. Jean found Myrie at the front, her back straight, her datapad held tightly. She gave him a small, worried glance as he joined her. The ship landed without grace, its engines kicking up dust. A ramp extended. The being that walked down was tall, with a rigid exoskeletal form and dark, compound eyes. Kellyan. Behind it walked two others armed with sleek rifles. Administrator Myri, the lead Kellyan said, its voice a synthetic vibration. I am Emissary Kraz. The Kellyan Dominion has noted the impressive yield of your neural grain harvests. Your colony sits in a region of space now under Dominion resource management. Myri took a small step forward. This colony is a member of the Galactic Concord. Our trade agreements are filed with them. You have no authority here. The Concord protects its viable members, Kraz buzzed. Your output has been declining. Your defenses are non-existent. You are not viable. You are a liability. The Dominion offers efficiency. You will surrender 70% of your stored harvest and future yields. In return, you receive our oversight. The silence in the square was absolute. Jean felt the fear around him like a physical chill. He looked at Tay, who stood at the edge of the crowd, still as a stone, watching the Kellyan ship. He wasn't looking at the emissary. He was looking at the sky, toward where the pale ghost of the Helix Nebula was just becoming visible in the twilight. His lips were moving, silently, as if repeating an old, forgotten prayer. The meeting hall felt like a trap. The air was thick with the smell of fear and the low hum of the Kellyan ship's idle engines outside. Emissary Kraz had laid out his terms with cold clarity. 70% of everything. Now, and every harvest after. It was not a negotiation. It was a slow death sentence for the colony. Myri stood before the tall alien, her hands clasped tightly behind her back to hide their shaking. We need time to consider. Our people must vote. This is our way. Kraz's head tilted. Your way is a luxury of the protected. You have one of your planetary rotations. 28 hours. Then we will begin collection. Failure to comply will be met with direct control of your facilities. The Kellyans left, returning to their sharp-looking ship parked on the landing field. The moment the hall doors closed, the quiet broke into a storm of panicked voices. Some colonists shouted about fighting. Others cried that they should give in, maybe the Dominion would be merciful later. Myri felt a crushing weight on her chest. Fighting was suicide. Giving up was slow starvation. She walked back to her small office, Jean following close behind. There has to be something, he said, his voice tight. The Concord. They have to help. They can't, a rough voice said from the doorway. Tay stood there, leaning against the frame. He looked older than ever. The Concord works by consensus. To act for one grain colony against the Kellyans? It would take months of talk. We have hours. So we're just supposed to roll over? Jean snapped, frustration boiling over. No, Tay said, his eyes locking on Myri. You're supposed to look, not for help from out there. He pointed a thumb at the ceiling toward space. But for what's already here. What are you talking about, Tay? Myri asked, exhaustion in her voice. The ghosts in the machine, he said softly. Then he turned and walked away, leaving them in confused silence. Myri sat at her desk, the colony's main data terminal glowing before her. She had looked through the records 100 times. Budgets, yields, maintenance logs. All of it showed a colony barely getting by. But Tay's words nagged at her. What's already here? She started a new search, not for official records, but for anomalies. Power fluctuations. Unexplained minor repairs. She pulled up the logs from the old defense grid, the one that had supposedly failed years before she was even born. The final entry was a terse report, primary reactor cascade failure, grid offline, irreparable with colonial resources, signed by the chief of operations, a name she didn't recognize. She cross-referenced the date. Around that same time, there was a tiny logged sensor ping from the long-range array, the one Jean saw Tay fixing. It was marked as a system diagnostic. But the destination code was strange. Not a Concord relay, but a string of numbers and a single word. Mungshil. Jean, she said, her voice barely a whisper. What did you see in that outpost? Exactly. Jean described the active screens, the military codes, the listening frequency focused on the Helix Nebula. He called it listening to the quiet, Jean finished. Myri's fingers flew across the terminal. She accessed the deepest archival layer, a digital attic of data brought from Earth generations ago. She searched for Mungshil. Dozens of entries appeared, but they were all locked behind an encryption wall. Frustrated, she leaned back. Then she noticed something. Each failed access attempt logged an error code, and each error code was identical, repeating in a pattern that matched the colony's old, defunct public time signal, a signal that had stopped broadcasting decades ago. It wasn't a password. It was a rhythm. It's a heartbeat, she breathed. She isolated the colony's oldest, simplest transmitter. It was used for local weather alerts. She programmed it to pulse out the old time signal's rhythm, the pattern of the error codes. She aimed it not at the Kellian ship, but on a tight beam toward the dark patch of space where the Helix Nebula hung. She pressed transmit. The console hummed for a few seconds. Nothing happened. Of course, nothing happened. She felt foolish. She was sending a nursery rhyme into a nebula while wolves pounded at the door. Hours passed. Night fell on new SAEGYE. Jean had gone to check on their parents, to offer what little comfort he could. Myri stayed at her desk, staring at the star chart on her wall. The Kellian ship was a blinking red dot on the field. The Helix Nebula was just a smudge of blue. A soft chime came from her terminal. A new file had appeared in the archive. It hadn't been downloaded. It had simply unlocked. The title was Project Mungshil, Initial Brief. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She opened it. It was text only, no images. Asterisk Project Mungshil is not a weapon. It is a promise. A promise that if the light goes out, an ember will survive. Construction site, Helix Nebula, Sector Theta 7. Resource harvesting from nebular materials. Continuous low-power state. Primary directive, watch. Listen. Wait for the code from the children of Earth. Do not engage. Do not reveal. Only remember. Asterisk. The file ended. There were no details on what Mungshil was. A station? A vault? But the words continuous low-power state matched what Jean saw. It was listening. Myri ran to find Tay. She found him in his small hut on the edge of the fields, polishing an old earth-made metal with a cloth. He didn't look up as she burst in. It's real, she said, holding her pad out to him. What is it, Tay? What did we build out there? Tay took the pad, read the text slowly. His calloused thumb brushed over the word, Mungshil. A deep sadness filled his eyes. We built a lifeboat, he said, his voice thick, and we left it in the dark, hoping no one would ever need to find it. He looked at her, his expression grave. Knowing it's there changes nothing, Myri. A lifeboat you can't call to shore is just a piece of floating metal. The code, the real one, it's not a data pattern. It's a verdict. It means Earth has decided we're already lost. The night was long and silent. The usual sounds of the colony, the gentle whir of nighttime irrigation, the distant hum of the recycling plant were absent. It was as if new SAGYE itself was holding its breath. Jean sat with his family in their small home, but no one spoke. The weight of the coming morning pressed down on them all. Myri did not sleep. She sat in the administration dome, the words from the Mungshil file burning in her mind. A lifeboat you can't call to shore. Tay's words were worse than hopeless. They meant there was a chance, a real one, but it was locked behind a door no one knew how to open. The Kellian ship sat on the landing field like a silent, dark stone. As the first gray light touched the sky, Emissary Kraw's voice crackled over the public address system. It was not a call to a meeting. It was an order. Colony Administration. Report to the landing field with your full yield inventory. The transfer will begin in 1 hour. Myri stood up, her body stiff. This was it. She could hand over their food, their future, and watch her people slowly wither. Or she could refuse and invite a violence they could not withstand. There were no good choices, only survival and defiance, and she did not know which was which anymore. She walked out into the cool dawn air. A small crowd had gathered, their faces pale and scared. Jean pushed his way to her side. Tay was there too, standing apart, his gaze fixed on the eastern horizon where the last stars were fading. "Myri, you can't just give it to them," Jean whispered fiercely. "What would you have me do, Jean?" she asked, her voice hollow. "Should I get our people killed for pride? For grain? For our home?" he said, but the words sounded young even to him. The ramp of the Kellyan ship lowered. Kraz descended, followed by 4 armed guards. Their weapons were not held ready, but their presence was clear. This was a transaction, but one where only one side had any power. "Your data," Kraz stated, extending a thin, segmented hand. Myri looked at the datapad in her own hand. It contained the work of generations. The lifetimes of her parents, their friends, everyone she knew. She thought of the children in the crowd, their wide eyes. She thought of the hidden outpost listening to the nebula. She thought of Tay's lifeboat, drifting in the dark, built by people who expected the worst. A strange calm settled over her. If they expected the worst, then they had planned for this moment. Not for a mayor making a deal, but for a human being backed into a corner with no way out. The code was not a technical signal. Tay had said it was a verdict. It was what you said when you had nothing left to say. She looked past Kraz, past his ship, to the lightning sky. Somewhere up there was the Helix Nebula. Somewhere up there was Mungshil. She did not hand over the datapad. Instead, she lifted her chin and spoke. She did not shout. She used her normal voice, the one she used to settle disputes in the meeting hall. But she did not speak to Kraz. She spoke to the open air, to the microphones, to the hidden relay Tay had repaired, hoping it was listening. "This is Administrator Myri of the new SAEGYE colony. Our answer is no." She took a deep breath, remembering the old, poetic phrase from the file, the one Tay had muttered like a fragment of a dream. "The night is darkest before the Mungshil dawn." For a second, nothing happened. Kraz buzzed, a sound of annoyance and confusion. A poetic refusal is still a refusal. You have chosen direct control. He motioned to his guards. Then, a green light on the side of the administration dome winked on. A light that had been dark for 50 years. It was the old, secure lasercom array activating itself. A single line of text scrolled across its tiny, dusty screen. A line only Myri could see from her angle. Verification received. Stand by. Deep within the earth, in a bunker that had been dug before new SAGYE was even a dream, a soft alarm sounded. It was not a loud noise. It was a gentle, persistent chime that had never been heard before. Officer Sue, who had spent her entire career monitoring a silent, dark channel, jolted in her chair. On her main screen, a sequence of words glowed green against the black. "The night is darkest before the Mungshil dawn." Below it, the source, Colony New SAEGYE, Relay Alpha. Her hands trembled as she opened the secure log. The final protocol. She had practiced the steps 1,000 times, never believing she would do them for real. She entered her command code. Then she turned to her superior, Commander Day, who was already looking over her shoulder, his face pale. "Sir," she said, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "The code. From a live colony. It's not a drill." Day stared at the words. They were not a call for help. They were the last message. The one that said a child of Earth was about to be swallowed by the dark. It was the trigger he had prayed he would never see. He thought of the cost. He thought of the secret kept for a century. He thought of the people on that faraway world, saying these words because they had nothing else. He placed his hand on the biometric scanner. It glowed blue, reading his palm, his heartbeat, his DNA. "Authenticate," he said. Sue did the same. The system processed for 3 long seconds. Then, a new line of text appeared on every screen in the silent, buried room. "Final safeguard satisfied. Project Mungshil is released." Day let out a breath he felt he had been holding for 20 years. "Send the execute order," he whispered. "God help us all." In the dark of the Helix Nebula, where dust and gas had hidden a secret for 100 years, something that had been sleeping began to wake. The landing field was frozen. Kraz took a step forward, his armored feet crunching on the gravel. "You have wasted your last moment of independence," he buzzed, motioning his guards. "Take control of the main storage silos." Myri did not move. She kept her eyes on that single green light. "Stand by." It was the smallest, thinnest thread of hope she had ever clung to. Jean moved to stand in front of her, his fists clenched, facing the approaching Kellians. Then the world changed. It did not start with a sound. It started with a feeling, a deep, subsonic vibration that came up through the soles of their feet. It was not loud, but it was everywhere, in the air, in the bones. The leaves on the nearby trees shivered without any wind. In the sky, the weak sun seemed to dim for a second. A shadow passed over it, but it was not a cloud. On the bridge of the Kellian ship, the sensor officer let out a sharp, startled click. His screens, which had shown only the colony and the empty space around it, were now a storm of energy. A massive gravitational anomaly was forming at the edge of the system, near the Helix Nebula. It was pulling the nebula's dust and gas apart in a controlled, circular pattern. "What is that?" the Kellian captain demanded, his voice tense. "A natural event? A Concorde fleet?" "No, Captain," the officer replied, his claws tapping frantically. "The energy signature, it is artificial, and it is immense. It is coming from inside the nebula." On the ground, Tay's head snapped up. He was not looking at the Kellians. He was staring into the sky, toward the nebula, his eyes wide. A single tear traced a clean line through the dust on his cheek. He had waited a lifetime. He had never believed he would see it. The vibration grew stronger. A low hum, deeper than thunder, filled the air. Every piece of electronics in the colony flickered. Lights blinked on and off. The Kellian guards stopped their advance, looking around in confusion. Kraz turned his head sharply, his compound eyes scanning the horizon. Then it broke through. It did not streak into view with fiery engines. It did not tear out of a warp tunnel. It simply emerged. The swirling blue gases of the Helix Nebula parted like a curtain, and something slid into the clear space of the star system. First, it was just a shape, a jagged, irregular silhouette against the glowing dust. But as it moved forward, the scale became clear. It was not a ship. It was a mountain, a floating continent of dark metal. The weak sunlight did not gleam on its surface. It was swallowed by it. The hull was blacker than space, a darkness that seemed to drink the light around it. It moved with a terrifying, silent grace. It was so large that the mind struggled to understand it. It made the Kellian cruiser on the landing field look like a child's toy. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. People pointed, their mouths open, their fear of the Kellians completely forgotten, replaced by a new, awe-filled terror. On the Kellian bridge, panic erupted. The sensor screens were screaming. Energy readings were off the scale. The object's hull material was unknown. It absorbed scans, reflected nothing. It was a hole in their sensors. The captain barked orders to raise shields, to power weapons, but his voice sounded small and desperate. The giant vessel came to a stop. It did not move into orbit around New SAEGYE. It simply hung in space between the colony and the nebula. It was present. That was all. A signal arrived. It did not come on any standard communication channel. It was a raw, powerful broadcast that overrode every frequency, from the colony's weather radio to the Kellian ship's secure military band. It was not a voice. It was a simple text message in clear galactic common script. It appeared on every screen, on every device in the colony and on the Kellian ship. 2 words. Stand down. The silence that followed was absolute. The deep hum faded to a barely felt tremor. The wind stopped. No one spoke. No one moved. Kraz stood perfectly still. The confidence and cold authority had drained from him. He was not looking at Myri anymore. He was staring at the sky, at the impossible black shape that dominated the heavens. His mind, trained for tactics and domination, could not process this. This was not a weapon of war. It was a statement, a statement that everything he knew about power was wrong. Gene found he could not breathe. He looked from the monstrous, quiet ship to his sister's face. Myri was crying silently, tears streaming down her cheeks, but she was smiling too, a wild, disbelieving smile. She had called for a dawn, and a mountain had answered. Tay finally moved. He walked slowly toward Myri and Jean. He placed a heavy, shaking hand on each of their shoulders. His eyes were still fixed on the ship, with a look of heartbreaking pride and profound grief. "Mungshil," he said, the word a sigh of release. "They waited. They heard you." In the sky, the supercarrier did nothing else. It issued no threats, targeted no weapons. It simply existed. It was the quiet after a shout that had echoed for 100 years. And in its shadow, the galaxy, for the first time, had nothing to say. The silence was not peaceful. It was heavy, like a weight on the chest of every living thing in the system. On New HFY, people stared at the black shape in the sky, not with joy, but with a stunned confusion. They had been saved, but by what? It was too big to understand. On the landing field, Emissary Kraz slowly turned his head from the sky back to Myri. The arrogant tilt was gone. His rigid posture remained, but it now looked brittle, like a tree frozen in ice. He did not speak. He simply made a sharp, clicking gesture to his guards. Without a word, they turned and walked, quickly but without running, back up the ramp of their ship. The ramp hissed closed. The engines whined to life, not with the aggressive roar of before, but with a subdued, urgent hum. The Kellyan cruiser lifted from the field, kicking up dust and shot upwards, not toward the supercarrier, but away from it, in a wide arc that would take it out of the system by the longest possible route. It was not a retreat from battle. It was a quiet, hurried exit from a room where they no longer belonged. The news did not travel at the speed of light. It traveled faster. Subspace channels, used by merchants and diplomats, exploded with panic and confusion. The first signals were from automated Kellyan probes at the edge of the system, sending frantic, fragmented data about an unidentified planetary-scale object. Then, the Concorde's own listening posts confirmed it. The images were blurry, taken from extreme range, but they showed enough. A ship, if it could be called that, of impossible size. And the broadcast, the two words, "Stand down." On the lush homeworld of the Bren, the Concorde's peaceful assembly was in session. The topic was a minor trade dispute. The holographic image of the kindly Bren envoy, who had visited New SAGYE, flickered as he prepared to speak. Then, all the screens in the great chamber went dark for a second. When they came back, the same two words in Galactic Common were etched across every display. Underneath, in small text, was the source identifier, UEDS Mungshil. The chamber erupted into noise, a chorus of clicks, whistles, and translated shouts. The Bren envoy felt a cold dread. UEDS stood for United Earth Defense Ship. Humanity had a defense. A defense they had never mentioned, never hinted at, during decades of peaceful integration into the Concorde. The implications were terrifying. What else had they not mentioned? Across the galaxy, in council chambers and command centers, a similar silence fell, followed by a storm of activity. The Kellyan Dominion's high command went into immediate lockdown. Their strategy had been built on assessing and overpowering visible threats. This was not visible. It was a shadow. Their entire understanding of humanity shifted in an instant. They were not a young, clever species to be managed. They were an ancient, patient one that built lifeboats before they ever said hello. On Earth, the reaction was different, but just as profound. The public feeds, which had been showing morning news and entertainment, were interrupted. A solemn-faced announcer appeared. She explained, in careful, simple terms, that a long-held secret had been revealed. Project Mungshil was real. It was not a weapon of war, but an arc of continuity, built in a time of great fear after first contact. Its purpose was preservation, not attack. The announcement was met with global shock. People looked at each other on streets and in homes, wondering how such a thing could be hidden. There was no celebration. There was a deep, unsettled awe, and for many, a sadness. Their ancestors had looked at the stars and been so afraid they built a hiding place. Back on new SAEGYE, the initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a strange, hollow feeling. The immediate threat was gone. But the sky was now occupied by a monument to human fear. Jean stood with Myri and Tay outside the administration dome, looking up. "It's so quiet," Jean said. "Why doesn't it say anything else? Who's on it?" "Generations," Tay said softly. He was leaning against the wall, his energy spent. "My daughter was an engineer. She volunteered for the second crew rotation 50 years ago. I never met my granddaughter. They live there. They were born there. Their whole world is that ship." Myri understood the weight of it now. The galaxy was silent because it was stunned. Humanity was silent because they were ashamed and heartbroken. They had proven they could keep a secret from everyone, even from themselves. They had proven they could plan for the end of the world. And in doing so, they had shown a fundamental lack of trust to all their new neighbors. The supercarrier Mungshil hung in the void. It did not move. It did not communicate again. Its sheer presence had done what 1,000 warships could not. It had silenced a galaxy not through force, but through the sheer, overwhelming weight of a revealed truth. Humanity was not what they seemed. They were survivors, and they had been preparing to survive alone since the day they met the stars. The question hanging in the new silence was simple and dreadful. What did they do now? A small shuttle came from the Mungshil. It was not a warship. It was a simple, unarmed transport, the same color of light-swallowing black. It landed softly on the landing field where the Kellian ship had been just hours before. The people of New SAGYE watched from a distance. A quiet, nervous crowd. A ramp extended. A woman walked down. She wore a simple, gray uniform with no rank insignia. She looked young, perhaps Jin's age, but her eyes were old, like Tay's. They held the calm of someone who had only ever known the inside of a metal world. She was accompanied by 2 others, a man and a woman, who carried no visible weapons. Myri, Jean, and Tay walked forward to meet them. The woman stopped and gave a small, formal bow. "Administrator Myri, I am Captain Hannah. We received your signal." Her voice was clear, but it had a flat quality, like someone who did not use it often for conversation. She looked at Tay. Her calm expression flickered for a second, a crack in a perfect surface. "Grandfather," she said. Tay's breath caught. He took a stumbling step forward. He reached out a trembling hand, stopping just before he touched her face, as if she were a dream. "Hannah," he whispered, the name full of a lifetime of loss. "You have your mother's eyes." Hannah allowed a small, tight smile. "She spoke of you every day." She then turned her attention back to Myri. "We are here to offer assistance. And to explain." They were taken to the administration dome. Hannah refused any offer of food or drink from the colony. "Our bodies are adjusted to ship nutrients. Outside food would make us ill," she explained without emotion. Inside, she stood before them. "You called Mungshil a weapon. The galaxy will call it a weapon. It is not. It is a seed bank. For people, for animals, for plants, for memory." She activated a small projector. Images floated in the air. Vast, rolling fields under artificial suns inside the ship. Libraries with physical paper books. Dataspheres containing the cultural records of every nation on Earth. Workshops building tools, not guns. Its official name is the Continuity Vessel Mungshil. Its only weapon is its hull. Its only defense is that it cannot be seen. Until now. Jean stared at the images. "You have a whole world in there." "We have a copy," Hannah corrected gently. "A backup. Our mission was to wait in silence. If Earth ever went dark, if the signal never came, we were to find a quiet corner and try again. We never expected to be called. We never expected to be seen." "Why show us this?" Myri asked. "Because you have to understand what you revealed," Hannah said. "You did not reveal a sword. You revealed a scar. The scar of a species that was so afraid of the dark. They built their own little light to hide." She looked at Tay. "My mother missed the sun. She would describe it to me from poems. I never understood it until today. It is overwhelming. Tay's voice was rough. The cost was necessary, Hannah finished for him. That is what we were taught. Our lives for the chance at a future. We are not heroes. We are librarians. Gardener custodians. She switched off the projector. Now the galaxy has seen the library, and they think it is an arsenal. We must change that perception, or the fear we were built to escape will become the very thing that destroys everything. How? Jean asked. Hannah turned to him. By doing what we were made for. Not hiding, but helping. Your colony was almost taken. Your grain is vital. Our hydroponic systems are 10,000 times more efficient. We can show you. We can strengthen your fields. Your power grid is failing. Our reactors produce energy with near-zero waste. We can help you build a new one. Myri understood. It was not an offer of protection. It was an offer of partnership. A way to show that the Mungshil's purpose was creation, not destruction. And the Concord? The Kellians? Myri asked. We will not move from this spot, Hannah said. Our presence here is our only statement. We will invite their scientists, their engineers. They can scan our hull, they will learn nothing, but they can try. They can tour our agricultural decks. We will show them our history books. The truth is our only weapon now. She looked out the window at her ship, a black mountain against the blue sky. For 100 years, we were a secret. Now we are a fact. A fact must be lived with. We will show them how to live with us. By showing them we only ever wanted to live. Hannah then turned to Tay. Grandfather, would you like to see it? Your daughter's garden is on deck 7. The roses are in bloom. Tay's face, so long etched with lonely duty, finally broke. He wept openly, silently. He simply nodded. Jean looked at Myri. The fear of the morning was gone. In its place was a complicated, heavy hope. They were not saved by a savior. They were seen by a lost family, finally coming home. And the work of explaining that to a silent, frightened galaxy was just beginning. 3 weeks passed. The Mungshil did not move. It remained where it had first appeared, a permanent, dark landmark in the sky of new SAGYE. People stopped staring at it with fear. It became part of the view, like a distant mountain range that had always been there. The first ships to return were not Kellian. They were Concord vessels. Small, unarmed science ships and observer probes, hanging at the very edge of the system, their sensors turned toward the Supercarrier. They did not hail. They only watched. Captain Hannah, as promised, sent an open invitation. She transmitted schematics of the Mungshil's agricultural and cultural sectors. She offered guided tours. For a long time there was no response. The silence from the galaxy was a wall. Then, a single ship broke from the Concord group. It was the diplomatic vessel of the Bren. The same kindly envoy who had been unable to help now steered his ship toward the colony. He landed nervously, his large eyes wider than usual. He was met not by soldiers, but by Myri, Jean, and Hannah. Hannah wore her simple gray uniform. She carried a small, live apple tree sapling in a pot of earth soil, a gift. The Concord is uncertain, the Bren envoy said, his voice soft with anxiety. You must understand. Such a secret, such scale. It suggests a capacity for deception we did not believe possible. Hannah nodded. It was not deception. It was silence. There is a difference. One is meant to trick. The other was meant to protect a possibility. We are sorry for the fear it causes. We invite you to see what we protected. She led him not to a weapon bay, but to a newly built greenhouse on the colony's edge, constructed with Mungshil's materials in just days. Inside, plants from Earth grew next to the native blue grain. The air was rich and moist. This technology is yours, Hannah said to the envoy. The plans, the knowledge. We ask for nothing in return. The Bren envoy touched a leaf of the apple tree, his long fingers gentle. He looked from Hannah's earnest face to Myri's, and then to the ceiling, beyond which the Mungshil waited. You are giving it away? We are sharing it, Hannah corrected. A secret kept is a weight. A secret shared can be a foundation. Word began to spread. The Kellyan Dominion issued no statements, but their warships, which had been posturing near other human colonies, quietly pulled back to their own borders. The display of force had not frightened them. The display of purpose had. They understood weapons. They did not understand a people who built arcs. On Earth, the governments began the long, hard process of openness. Data streams from the Mungshil, showing its libraries and gardens, were broadcast publicly. The story shifted from a secret weapon to a sad, profound insurance policy. The global mood turned from shock to a somber reflection. At the United Earth headquarters, Ambassador June prepared for his address to the Concord Assembly. He was a calm man, but the weight of history pressed on him. When he spoke, his image was transmitted across known space. "We of Earth offer no excuses," he began. "We offer an explanation. We were afraid. When we first learned we were not alone, our first, deepest instinct was not to reach out. It was to ensure that if the hand we reached for slapped ours away, a memory of US would remain. We built a lifeboat and hid it in the dark. We are ashamed of that fear, but we must be honest about it. The Mungshil is not our fist. It is our scar. And now we choose to heal." He paused, looking directly into the transmitter. "We will open the Mungshil's non-military databases to all. We offer its engineering capabilities to aid in galactic projects, climate stabilization, resource scarcity, archival recovery. We have spent a century learning to sustain a closed system. Let that knowledge sustain something open instead." Back on new SAEGYE, Jean stood in the new greenhouse. The apple tree sapling was already looking stronger. He looked out at the fields, being upgraded with gentle, efficient technology from the Mungshil. Their yield would not just recover, it would multiply. He found Tay sitting on a bench, looking at the horizon where the Mungshil was a faint, dark smudge in the daylight sky. Tay was different. The melancholy was still there, but it was quieter, softened. "Are you going to go there? To stay?" Jean asked. Tay shook his head slowly. "My home is here, the soil, the sun. But my family is there now, too. Hannah will visit. The door is open. That's enough. For 100 years, there was no door at all." Jean sat beside him. The galaxy was still quiet, but it was no longer the silence of shock. It was the quiet of thought, of reconsideration. The Mungshil had not conquered. It had simply appeared. And in appearing, it asked a question of every species that saw it. What do you build when you are afraid? Humanity had built a refuge for their ghosts. Now they had to build a future with the living. The story was not over. It was just beginning, and for the first time it was beginning in the light.